So I'm Jeff Swanson, born in Illinois, 1949, second generation, mostly Scandinavian immigrants. And Richard Houston, a psychologist, is interviewing me about resilience. And I've had to tap into a lot of resilience resources in my life. Youngster in 1967, I joined the Marine Corps at age 17, volunteered for Vietnam, and they soon sent me. I was in Marine helicopters and then survived that. Came home, went to college, social science major, anthropology, sociology, political science, and economics. And then became a Lutheran pastor, and then went into our Air Force for 26 more years as a chaplain. Spent over 10 years overseas of my life. And my first tour, of course, was Vietnam in Marine helicopters, combat helicopters, doing combat resupply and medevacs. And then my last overseas was the trauma hospital in Iraq during the surge at Balad. It's where we had our trauma hospital, and it was also the most frequently attacked spot. I was over there as the oldest person with America's Sons and Daughters. So that's a little bit about me. I live here with Donna, my dear wife. She's a retired teacher. And here we are.
Great.
Family, I'm second generation, mostly Scandinavian immigrants from Sweden and Norway. Almost all of them were farmers in northern Illinois and hard workers, good work ethic. Almost all of them were FDR Democrats to the max. And they also, now as a little kid, I became very aware of this, that they also loved President Eisenhower, who was a Republican. So when I grew up, I did not grow up with this ugly political angst that we have going on now. There were polite dialogues about politics, there was some joking and all that, but none of this condescending, nasty angst and polarizations that we have now. So, you know, I learned to be resilient, kind of middle of the road kind of person, thinking as a social scientist about politics, also having my own views, but staying out of trouble for the most part with a lot of politics. By not creating more storms out there, trying to unite people, love people, get together people. For example, we all want a government that works. We all want a secure nation. We all want healthy conditions for our people. Well, how do you get that? You know, that seems to be all the, you know, the big turmoil that we have now. So what I think I've done is taken a very rational approach, like, okay, what is it we can do to get together and talk about these things? Because that was part of my resilience growing up. I had relatives that they sat down and had coffee and they talked. And they argued a little bit, but I didn't hear swearing and screaming and yelling and calling each other names and that kind of thing like we got going on now. So that upbringing I had, that core value of civility, you know, was extremely important to me.
Good. Well, good.
So part of my resilience was some of the role models I had in my life, and one of them was my Uncle Roland, a great father. Never heard him swear, never saw him drink too much, nothing like that. Great citizen, volunteered for the fire department, just a wonderful man. And he was a United States Marine in Korea, and I had World War II relatives. And then we also had the draft obligatory service back then. So when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a Marine, and so I did. At age 17, I joined the Marine Corps and put up my hand and volunteered for Vietnam, and they soon sent me. I think back then, as I look at my life, I was, what does a 17-year-old have in their head? You know, we really don't have the big picture on life or the depth of, you know, all the things that are right or wrong. And so off I went to Vietnam, and I found an energy in doing like medevac missions, no matter how dangerous they were. There was an energy, a devotion in me. I was good at it, and something I found a lot of fulfillment in. But I was stationed next to a prison camp where North Vietnamese and Viet Cong prisoners were taken. And part of my duty was to guard the perimeter with that camp, defend the perimeter against escapes and attacks or whatever else was going to go on in that area. And to my big shock, again, as a youngster, a teenager, Marine, I saw what I believe to be torture. People were taken and tethered by their feet and hung upside down and taken up in the air in helicopters and dropped into the ocean and dangled around and then brought back for interrogation. And then I also saw people tethered in the helicopters, their feet tethered, and they were pushed out, blindfolded, pushed out of the helicopters and fell into the water. Of course, they didn't drown because they were tethered and the helicopter soon jerked them back out of the water. These were not American helicopters. These were actually Sikorsky helicopters, but they were transferred to the South Vietnamese who really ran the prison camp. And I heard people hollering and yelling and all kinds of noises that I knew were not good. I didn't know exactly what all was going on out there, but I knew it wasn't good. And so, I mean, that really bothered me. It jolted me for several reasons. First of all, there was enough mistreatment of people. There was enough pain and ugliness, and suffering, and children caught in the crossfire, and innocent people driven off of their homes and lands and farms and put in places that, like refugee camps we called Dog Patch, were just terrible places of squalor, and there was enough suffering going on in the war and the calamity, but to actually see people tortured, I mean, I just thought that was atrocious. And that really tested my resilience because I had to come to grips with the fact, like, I believe this is wrong, what am I going to do about it? So here I am, a 19-year-old Marine. I'm not going to do much of anything because, I'm not an officer, I'm not a politician in the government or anything like that. And so that set off a lot of churning inside of me. Maybe, I don't know, 10, 12 years it took me to really grapple with that and come to peace. But survivor guilt, guilt of maybe not saying enough or doing enough. And interesting to me is I became an Air Force chaplain later, much more mature, much more aware, and then to hear about Abu Ghraib and places like that when we were continuing to do those kinds of behavior, I mean, that really upset me. But then I had a lot more resources in my own head and my own heart to be able to address those concerns with the politicians and the U.S. military, and I did. I reported prisoner abuse. And I wrote to Senator John McCain, who put me in touch with some government leaders, and I was able to talk with them and express my concerns. So that began to make me feel better, and to think better of myself and to think better about the conditions that we were in. And it all stems from like the core values I think I had as a child. You don't do things that unintentionally are callous or reckless and bring harm to people, or intentionally harm people that do not need to be treated like with a roughness or violence. So I had some core values I really tapped into for my resilience. Helicopter Squadron 361, that was cargo helicopters, CH-53 Sikorsky helicopters. We had the A and D models. And I volunteered to fly as an air crewman. And one of the medevac missions I went on was to the 7th Marines. They had a series of fire support bases along the Ho Chi Minh Trail south of Da Nang. And they were ferociously attacked. And one of the missions I went on was a nighttime mission to emergency deliver ammunition to them, specifically 106 recoilless rifle rounds and other things. And we were going to airdrop this mission in, but like you come in a helicopter and you set the ammunition down. It's on a tether and in a big cargo net, and then you get the heck out of there real quick. And you do so without lights. Extremely dangerous at night. because you really can't see the ground, just not everything is lit up. And the pilots have a radar altimeter, they can see how high they are above the ground, and we're looking out and, trying to tell, look for things that we could see in the ground, but extremely dark night. And we went into a hover at about 500 feet to let the load quit swinging back and forth. And the Viet Cong shot a mortar at us. And I remember seeing the flash out there, and I was ordered to hold my fire, and I put the front sight of the M60 machine gun right on that little blue flash spot I saw. And I really wanted to pull that trigger, but I didn't because I was under orders not to. And the mortar round missed us, and it went right by the helicopter rotor blades, and it hit straight below us and hit in the midst of 4 Marines who were there to, try to guide us in and decouple this load of artillery rounds as quick as they could. And it hit right in the midst of them and killed all 4 of them. And so I watched them die. We took off, couldn't land. And then the next morning, I was able to go in there. We did a medevac mission to get other Marines who were wounded and South Korean Marines out of there. And, it was a terrible experience. One of the things that I did for that unit was when we would land and pick up items to deliver to them, whether it was sea rations or water buffaloes or whatever it was, ammunition, I would be given a packet of perfume letters that these young Marines had mailed to them from loved ones in the States. And I'd put the perfume letters for safekeeping in my flight suit, and I'd open up my wrist and put it on the machine gun and let the air blow in, and it would blow up my flight suit, and I'd have that very pleasant smell, as we went there and then dropped out of the air from 5,000 feet. I mean, that was just a moment of some kind of, relief or distraction maybe, in the midst of all of that terrible violence and ugliness. But, there I was with the perfume letters stuck in my flight suit and loading the dead Marines that they were intended for, on the helicopter. And then also the medevac people, the ones that were hurt, the ones that were injured, the ones that were bleeding. And that made me feel like I could do something good in the midst of all of this chaos and violence and suffering, to try to save somebody's life. And we also did medevacs for the Viet Cong and for the enemies that we brought in. If we could get a hold of them, get them on the helicopter, and get them to our naval support facility or somewhere where they could be medically treated, I just felt a sense of like humanity and love and being able to be brave for some cause other than wreaking death and destruction on people. I could do something to try to save and preserve life. And again, that goes back to my core values, resilience as a child. I remember one time my dad gave me a 20 gauge shotgun, and we were out, and a crow flew over me, and I reached up and boom, blew the crow out of the air. And my dad said to me, look, you don't need to be killing things that don't need to be killed. And if you're going to, shoot something like that, an animal, whether you need to be prepared to eat it. I didn't have to eat the crow, but I mean, that was a good lesson for me to preserve life, to love life, to hold people as precious. Even if there are our enemies, if we could get a hold of them and, treat them with a common respect. And boy, did that show up at the trauma hospital in Iraq and Balad, because we had our prisoners there, and I was able to dialogue with them. I was able to pray with them. They prayed for us. We prayed for them. And we had, I think, a good dialogue that there was something human going on here that was far more important than the politics of, nations that put us all together to kill each other. We were there at that moment to help each other and care for each other.
Okay.
So I got to talk with a former Viet Cong, and one of the things he told me, he said he came to America and he saw on television a football game, And he said, here was one side and here was the other side. And he said, guess what? My people were in the middle. We were the football getting kicked around. And I got to thinking about that. And I mean, he was so right. The Vietnamese, we had, 58,000 people killed, probably 6 times that many of us wounded. I mean, it was a terrible, violent war. But that suffering does not compare to what the Vietnamese went through. I'm talking about the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, and the South Vietnamese. They were stuck in the middle. And guns everywhere, AK-47s, just millions of rounds of ammunition, hand grenades galore, rockets and mortars, and all of this was in that little country, and people were setting it off right and left. We were dropping bombs, blowing things up, putting Agent Orange on them. The Vietnamese had farms and dikes and facilities that they had perfected over thousands of years of agriculture, and we were blowing up dikes, and the water was flooding, and their livelihood was disrupted, and they were caught in the middle. And so we would pick them up and take them to this little refugee camp we called Dog Patch, which was between Da Nang and Marble Mountain, and it was just squalor there. You can look up Dog Patch, Vietnam on the internet, and you can see pictures of it. They out in their farms, they had outhouses, they had wells, everything was, well taken care of and manicured. They knew how to raise ducks and chickens and how to, store their rice and all that. But Dog Patch, they were out of their element. They were just put in there and left to survive rats and dogs and cats, and it was just a place of squalor, where these people did tremendous suffering. Disease was rampant, and to see all of that suffering, it just tore at my heart, as a person. And so I think one of the things that all this did for me was bring out a sense of compassion. If we can work together with cultures, if we can work together with people, and do things that relieve suffering and help them become efficient and learn from them and preserve their ways of life, that's what we need to be doing. And one of the terrible things that I saw near a place called Phu Bai, we got mortared. Rockets, mortars came in on us. So the next day we went on a patrol to go out to those villages where the mortars came from and to say, okay, if you want to fight with us, here we are, let's fight. And also show support to the people who were friendly toward us. Well, one of the things that we had done was we put down a concrete slab and in one of the villages, and the Vietnamese people then built out of their own materials. We did some construction out of 2x4s for framing, but out of their own materials, which was thatched rice stalks, they built this little schoolhouse. And we made the pledge we weren't going to interfere with the school. They could teach whatever they want. We're not going to get there to indoctrinate them about politics. We just wanted them to have a nice school. Well, your kids were going to school. Guess what? The Viet Cong showed up ahead of us, sprayed the place with AK-47, fired, shot the kids. I mean, it's just horrible that people were acting like this. And I'm not going to totally blame them because they were caught in the middle. And the most caught in the middle of the people were the kids. And I've noticed that. I spent over 10 years overseas, Iraq, other places, Vietnam, that the people in war who suffer the most are the children. Parents go off to fight, parents come home wounded, parents become disrupted by war, the infrastructure gets disrupted, their lives get disrupted, education gets stopped for these kids, formal education. They're disrupted, they're hungry, they go without medical care, they go without food. They face the elements, they don't get clean water. I mean, just terrible things happen to traumatized children. And so, my advice, again, for resilience as nations, resilience as people, resilience as individuals, is do every single thing that we can to help children, to love children, to not engage them in all of this unnecessary suffering that they did not bring about. So what's my resilience made out of? I think a lot of it is made out of role models. People who were adults, who were hardworking. They weren't perfect people, but they were pretty good. They had good values, just the basic things about honesty and treating each other with civility, working to protect the children, working to have good homes for their families. So I had those role models. I also think that the church that I grew up in, the Swedish Augustana Lutheran Church, really had a lot to do with my resiliency, because it wasn't a real judgmental church, like we're right, everybody else is wrong, and all of that stuff. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was about, look, you're here, God put you here, you've got some talents and gifts, the world is around you, what are you going to do with the span of your life to make a contribution to humanity, to make the world a better place? What are you going to do? And then here's a whole bunch of people who have come before you and some of the good things that they did. So what are you going to do some good things? So, that church upbringing wasn't this fundamentalist, nasty, cranky, judgmental, church experience. It was loving and gracious, but a real sense of responsibility, like what is it you can do to make the world a better place and to help other people and to influence them. So then the role models I had, very important to me because I could draw on them. My Aunt Evelyn, for example, was a very frugal person. We had to do some chores, and then she would give us a quarter for our work back there in the 50s and early 60s. And that was a lot of money. You get a milkshake for a quarter, malted milk for a quarter back then. But then we'd have to explain to her, hey, what did you do with your quarter? So, there was fiscal accountability there. And man, did that come into play with me as I managed defense budgets as a senior chaplain. Because I never wanted to make decisions about spending America's taxpayers that in my own mind I couldn't explain to my Aunt Evelyn as being something responsible and morally correct to do. I also think that just something inside of me with some core values of where I could to be kind and decent and honorable. And I'm not a perfect person, but I could always go back to those core values and sort out, okay, here's who I really am. And I may be in a very difficult circumstance in life, like in a war or some awful, ugly circumstance, but what is it that I can do to make a positive contribution instead of making the situation worse, make it better. Things like the golden rule, that's stuck in my head. Do unto others, you would have them do unto you. Well, I wasn't always able to do that, especially as a Marine combatant. But I could look at the big picture experience and try to say, okay, what can I do to get beyond this and find some forgiveness and some peace within myself so that I can, go forward in the world. I had the sense of stewardship. I'm here, I've got some talents and gifts, what am I going to do with them, to try to help some other people. I remember one little kid in Iraq, and his name was Yawar. He was gunshot, went through his liver, his stomach, his spleen, and bullet just came out of nowhere, hit this little kid. And that was the least of his problems because one of his ribs was fractured and a piece of the rib broke out and severed his spinal cord from the inside out. It took this kid about 2 months to die. And I mean, that was a real traumatic experience for our medical people, that they were going to be able to keep this kid alive for a while, but they knew what was going to happen to him. And, with my sense of resilience and hope, I could say, look, you're bringing comfort and peace to this kid the best you can. And he's going to die. He's going to go be with his maker. But his little short life, you're going to add some grace and mercy and love to it through your medical care. And then ultimately, trust him to God. So you're going to have to learn from this kid and his life. And maybe what you can really get out of this is how precious life really is. And then I noticed that, okay, so we got back to, Baltimore. We got on the airplane and we flew into Baltimore. And, we landed there and we went to the civilian airport, dozens of us, and we went through customs and all that. And then we went to get our tickets to go wherever we're going to go in the United States. Well, while we were standing in line, I noticed all these medical people, me included, from the trauma hospital there. We all went to families, and we just wanted to be around kids because in the last 6-8 months a year, we had not been around many healthy kids. We had been around traumatized kids that were hurt in the business of warfare. And I don't know, just to see that joy and the celebration of life and people, if I can bring that about in my church work, anything that we can do to help people. For example, I serve the New Hope Lutheran Church in El Paso. That's become one of the 4 major food distribution centers for El Paso. We get semi-trucks loads of food in every week, and I certainly don't do all the work. I don't do much of the work at all, but the people do the work, and they redistribute that food on Saturday mornings to 600, 700, 800 families a week. And some of the cars, there's maybe a single parent, and they got 3, 4, 5 kids in there, and if they can get some good nutritious food, some fruit, maybe some snacks and some meat and other items, it just brings joy to their life. And I find a sense of fulfillment in wanting to bring goodness and life and love to the world instead of harm and more suffering.